Today I'm sharing with y'all my recipe for a classic homemade loaf of white bread made in a 13-inch Pullman loaf pan. Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. Today I'm making a really classic and simple loaf of homemade white bread. This loaf has a really soft and tender crumb and crust. It's not too sweet and it's really good. Now to bake this bread, I'm going to use a 13-inch Pullman loaf pan with a lid today. If you've never seen one of these pans, it's really neat. What you get from this pan is a loaf of bread that looks like those giant loaves from the grocery store, those big loaves of white bread. You can really recreate those in your home using a loaf pan like this. So this is a USA pan. I think that these are just the highest quality Pullman pans that you can get. I really like them. Now this one has a lid, so when I bake this bread, it's gonna fill this entire loaf pan and it's gonna have a flat top. So we're gonna end up with a square slice of bread. It's perfect for fitting in the toaster. It's great for making those butterfly sandwiches. For today's recipe, you can either use the loaf pan without a lid or with a lid. Without a lid, you'll get a nice domed old-fashioned top, and with the lid, you'll get that square loaf. It's a little bit trickier to use the lid. There's a few things to keep in mind, but I'll show you exactly how to do it. And this is such a fun loaf of bread to make. It's just a different looking loaf. If you're used to making homemade breads that are always that old-fashioned rounded top, which I love, this is just a kind of different, a little bit fun to make. So I'm going to show you exactly how to make this loaf of bread using this 13-inch by 4-inch by 4-inch Pullman loaf pan with a lid. So let's just get started on this really easy recipe. This is a really simple recipe to throw together. There's only 7 ingredients and it turns out great. So I'm going to start with 1 cup of lukewarm water. You want it to be about 100 to 110 degrees. That's perfect temperature to activate your yeast, but not too hot to kill it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this 1 cup of lukewarm water into the bowl of my stand mixer. I'm using my Zacme stand mixer today. You can use any stand mixer. You can make this by hand too if you want to. Now after the water, now it's time for some milk. I'm going to use 3/4 cup of warm milk. I pop this in the microwave for a minute to get it nice and warm. You want 3/4 cup. Now I like to use whole milk, but you can use any kind of milk. You can use skim milk, 1%, 2%. You can use oat milk, rice milk, any kind of milk alternative will work fine for this bread. So 3/4 cup right on into the stand mixing bowl. Now it's time for some butter. This is 4 tablespoons or 1/2 stick of melted butter. This is salted butter, but you can also use unsalted butter. It won't make that big of a difference. You can also use 4 tablespoons of any kind of oil that you'd want to use. So I'm putting 4 tablespoons of melted butter right on into my mixing bowl. This is a really great Lodge cast iron melting pot. I like to melt my butter in this melting pot. And next we want a little bit of sugar. So I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of this white granulated sugar. Now you can cut back on the sugar a little bit if you want to, but the sugar does help feed your yeast a little bit. It helps your bread to rise. So I'm going to use these 2 tablespoons of sugar. You can also use brown sugar, maple syrup, honey, and you can cut back on it a little bit. I'd use at least 1 to 2 teaspoons of sugar in this recipe. And the next ingredient we want for this bread is the yeast. This is my SAF instant yeast. This is a brand new container of it. I wanted to show you what it looks like. It comes in this brick. This is a 1-pound brick. Now you might think, oh my gosh, my yeast is so hard. It's hard as a rock. But once you open it and the air gets in there, it'll just loosen up and be normal. But this is a brand new container. I'm getting really low on mine, so I pulled one out of the freezer. I keep my yeast in the freezer. I have lots of these in the freezer because it stays good forever. So it's a good food storage item to have in the freezer and I'll never run out. And I rebuy them, I resupply every time I run out of one so that I never get too low on my yeast. So for this recipe, you want 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. Now, like I said, this is instant yeast. But you can also use active dry yeast, rapid rise. They'll all work just about the same in this recipe. So 2.5 teaspoons right on in there with the other ingredients. Now it's time for the flour. Now I love to use bread flour in my breads. You'll get a better rise, a chewier texture, and that's just because it has a little bit more protein than all-purpose flour. That really helps with the rise and the texture. So I'm gonna use bread flour, but you can also use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is a lot cheaper these days, so I understand if you wanna use that. So I'm gonna use 5 cups of this bread flour. I'm gonna put it right on into this mixing bowl. Now, in the description, I'm gonna leave you the printable recipe that'll also be on my website, robinonthefarm.com. I'm gonna leave you this recipe in cups and spoons like I'm making it today, and I'll also leave you this recipe in grams. All right, 5 cups right on into my mixing bowl. And it's already time to add our very last ingredient for this bread recipe. We need some salt. We're gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Now you can use any kind of salt that you want. This is my Redmond's Real Salt. I love this salt. I use this in all my baking, but you can also use white iodized table salt. You can use the pink Himalayan sea salt. This is a really beautiful, slightly pink North American fine ancient sea salt. It's mined out of Utah, so it's really pretty. So 1.5 teaspoons right on into your bowl with all your other ingredients. Definitely don't pour it over your mixing bowl so you don't spill a little bit too much salt in there. You'll ruin your recipe, and this is the very last ingredient, so you don't want to do that. Okay, now that we have all of our ingredients in the mixing bowl, it's time to let this get kneading. So I'm gonna turn this on to speed 1. I'm gonna give it 1 minute just to mix up my ingredients, and then I'm gonna just check to make sure I don't need to add a little bit more flour if it's too wet, or a little bit more water or milk if it's a little bit too dry. But I'll show you exactly what it should look like in just about a minute. I've given my mixer 1 minute to mix up the ingredients, and this is what the ball of dough is looking like. This is looking perfect. I don't feel like I need to add any more water or flour, so now I'm gonna turn this up to speed 2 or a medium-low speed for this to knead. And I'm gonna let this knead for 8 minutes. One of the things that I love about this Zacme mixer is that it has a timer. So I'm gonna turn this up to 8 minutes. I'm gonna turn it on to speed 2, and I'm gonna let this mixer knead for exactly 8 minutes. When 8 minutes is up, it's gonna stop. It also has a really cool light that shines down into the bowl. Oh, so cool. Okay, I'm gonna show you this dough in 8 minutes when it's done kneading. I have let my dough knead for exactly 8 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and get it out so we can check out this dough. Now, normally I'll just leave it in the bowl and cover it and let it start to rise. But let's just check out this dough today so you know exactly what yours should be like. Oh, look at this gorgeous dough. Isn't it so pretty? It's soft, it's tacky, but not too sticky. It's not sticking to my hands, but it does a little bit when you touch it, and that is exactly what you want. That means that it's not too dry, so it won't be dense, and it's not too sticky. I'll be able to manage it and shape it into a loaf. So this is gonna make really great, soft, tender, fluffy sandwich bread. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this back into the bowl, and I'm gonna cover it up. And now it's time to let this dough rise. This can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, just depending on the temperature of your home, your altitude. What you're looking for is for your dough to get fluffy, expanded, not necessarily doubled in size, but that is something good to look for. So I'm gonna let this go for about an hour, and then I'll show you exactly what mine looks like, and it'll be time to shape it into a loaf. I'll show it to you then. My dough has been rising for a little bit more than an hour. This is what it looks like. It's expanded, it's puffy, it looks perfect. So anywhere from about 45 minutes to about an hour and a half is probably perfect for your dough. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this dough out. And I'm just gonna go ahead and press it out. Press it out, press it out. Get all those little air bubbles out of it. Press it flat. And I'm trying to make it about as wide as my loaf pan is long. So this is looking great. Now I'm gonna do the head down, shoulders in method to roll this up. So you pull the head down, you flatten it a little bit, you pull the shoulders in just a little bit, and you press that out with the palms of your hands. And then I'm just gonna roll it into a nice tight log. Okay, then I'm gonna flip it over, I'm gonna press those seams together, press those ends together. Give it a good pat out. If you press those seams together, it'll help your bread not to burst while it's baking. And I'm just gonna flip it over. There we go. Now it's ready to put into the loaf pan. So here is my Pullman loaf pan. This is a 13 by 4 by 4 inch Pullman loaf pan. Let's take this lid off. Isn't this such a pretty pan? It's such high quality. I love how it feels. Now these Pullman pans, the USA pans, are silicone lined, so nothing will stick in here. So I never spray these pans. I'm just gonna go ahead and put my dough right on into this pan. There we go. And since I'm gonna use the lid, I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of flatten it out a little bit because I'm not looking for a domed loaf this time. I want it to fill this pan, and it's gonna be a square anyway. So there we go. That looks great. Now it's time to let this dough rise. Now what you're looking for is for this dough to rise within about 1 inch of the top of the loaf pan. Now the rise is really important with these Pullman pans with a lid. If you let your dough rise too much, as it's baking in the oven, you can actually have dough seeping out the sides of your loaf pan as it's baking. It can be a mess. That is not what you want. Also though, if you let it rise too little, your bread can be really dense and it won't totally fill this loaf pan, and that's what we're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this rise. This can be anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes, maybe even longer, just based on the temperature of your home, your altitude. I mean, lots of things can influence the rise time. But I'm gonna go ahead and check on this in about 20 minutes because I don't want it to over rise. But mine will probably take about 30 minutes. But I'm just put this lid on, it just slid on really nicely. And I'm gonna leave it open just a little bit just so I can keep an eye on this dough. But I will show you exactly what it should look like when it's time to throw this into the oven. In just a few minutes, I'm gonna go ahead and get my oven preheating to 350 degrees because I don't wanna have to be waiting on my oven. When this is the right height, I wanna go ahead and throw this right on into the oven to bake. So I will show it to you when it's time to put it in the oven. My dough has been rising in the Pullman pan for 30 minutes. You can see that mine is about 1 inch from the top of the loaf pan, and that is exactly what I want it to look like when it's time to go into the oven. Now, if yours over rises, there's a really simple solution. Just don't bake it with the lid on. You can just take this lid off, and then you won't have a square loaf. It'll be a little bit of a domed loaf, but it'll be great. That is much better than letting it overrise and then still trying to bake it with the lid on because you might have a problem. Okay, I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this loaf into the oven to bake. I'm gonna let it bake for about 35 minutes and I will show it to you when it's all done. Be sure you totally close the lid of your loaf pan. I just pulled our Pain de Mie, or 13-inch Pullman loaf, out of the oven. Are y'all ready to see this loaf of bread? Let's slide this lid off. Oh my goodness. Look how gorgeous this loaf of bread is. Look at that beautiful golden color. It filled up the entire pan. It rose all the way to the top. It's not too short. It didn't seep out over the edges while it baked. This is absolutely perfect. Okay, I let this bake at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this out of the loaf pan. I'm gonna flip it over. There we go. And remember, I didn't spray this loaf pan. I didn't do anything to it. It's not greased up and it just slid right on out. And it didn't stick to the lid either. Okay, what a gorgeous loaf of bread. Now, whenever I make this kind of bread, I always wonder, should I leave it like this or should I flip it over? I think I'm gonna flip it over. Do y'all consider this the top or this the top? That's what I always wonder when I make this bread. Okay, now this is what I like to do. I like to melt a little bit of butter in my cast iron melting pot. And then I like to brush this butter on top of my loaf. This gives you that shine, that beautiful shine, and it'll make your bread taste nice and buttery and also give you a really good soft crust. which is really what I'm after. I really like soft crust bread. You can just put this on the top, or you can go all the way around with it. Once you have that brushed on there really well, then you can cool yours on a cooling rack if you want, but I don't like cooling racks. I think it gives you kind of a crunchy crust. So what I like to do is wrap mine in a dry tea towel. I just wrap it up. All that warmth, the condensation in there while it's cooling will give you a really good soft crust. So I'm gonna let mine cool just for a little bit, and then we'll slice into this beautiful Pullman loaf and we'll check out the inside. Oh, it slices really well. Oh, look at that. What a gorgeous loaf of bread. It looks perfect inside. These loaves remind me of the sunbeam bread that I was raised on. This is just like those giant loaves of sunbeam bread. Now, if you look closely, you can see that it has this really fine crust. Oh, it's so nice. This has a great texture. It's nice and soft, but it also feels like it's gonna hold up to spreading some jam, some peanut butter. Great sandwich bread right here. Okay, I'm gonna take a little, let's see. Let's pull it apart here. Oh, yes. I'm gonna take a little bite. This is good homemade bread. I'm gonna give this bread a 10 out of 10. It's not too sweet. It has a fantastic flavor, a great texture. It's nice and soft. It's gonna stand up well for sandwiches or just slicing, toasting, enjoying with a little bit of butter and jam. You really can't go wrong with this recipe. If you're looking for a good way to keep your homemade breads fresh, these are our handmade beeswax bread bags. These are 11 by 17. This 13-inch Pullman loaf fits inside perfectly. These are a great alternative to plastic bags, and this is how I like to keep my breads fresh. I'm gonna leave the printable recipe for this 13-inch Pullman loaf down in the description and on my website, robinonthefarm.com. You can also find these beeswax bread bags there. Thanks so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I'll see y'all next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each need, ground wheat fresh, sowing her seed. The smell of fresh bread rises in the air. Simple life without a care. In Robin's kitchen, dreams come alive. Each loaf of bread a reason to strive. From sunrise to sunset, her heart's on show, working hard to make the dough. Little chickens in the coop, clucking with pride.